Welcome back, everyone. My name is Alex here, and I'm here with my two distinguished guests here. Now, Daniel, I have a question for you. You were covering the Hong Kong protest, and during that time, I was viewing the Western media. I was seeing one thing, you were seeing another thing. Maybe you could share with the audience here of where and why there was such a incredible difference in
Yeah, I mean, that's pretty much when I started making online content. That was the moment of awakening for me, and it was for a lot of other people too. Not only foreigners who were willing to look at what the media wasn't reporting, but even for Chinese people who maybe had some doubts about their own system or who idolized the West system. It was an awakening in terms of media for sure, with how different reality on the ground was with what was being reported, but also the idea of democracy and the idea of needing to protect your societies against outside interference when you're specifically being targeted. China's a country that's been targeted by the US since, for a long time, since the 60s. They were constantly interfering in the Taiwan issues, and in Hong Kong, all of these kinds of NGOs. And I think there were just so many things that were so ridiculous about it. Even according to Western standards of freedom, in a report put together by the Cato Institute, Hong Kong was the third freest place on earth, according to measurable freedoms, according to their standards. So of course, mainland China ranks low on that because it's according to their standards. But even when we're using their standards, third in the world. And the US was 17th, and the US was purportedly coming to save Hong Kong's democracy and freedom. So I think that was a real awakening moment for me, but also a lot of people here in China. Like I had some, local Chinese friends who weren't necessarily big fans of their own government, but this was a turning point for them. So I wonder if you noticed anything similar about what it was about the dynamics or how people's minds changed because of that event.
From my point of view and my reading of Hong Kong politics, obviously back then, 2019, the West obviously tried some kind of color revolution in Hong Kong. And this is very dangerous. So I gave a lecture the other day to Hong Kong journalists. I said, Hong Kong, like Kiev, like Istanbul, like Singapore, like Shanghai, is the interface between civilizations, between Chinese and non-Chinese, between socialist and capitalist. So either this kind of metropolis serve as a bridge between two civilizations, or they become an outpost against the other civilization. Hong Kong, of course, should choose be a bridge. So I would say this Hong Kong's state security law is one decisive step adopted by the Chinese National People's Congress to avoid decisively Hong Kong falling into the trap of Kiev. Decisively. Because we adopt one country, two systems, which is only conceivable and possible within a civilizational state. But the precondition is mutual respect. If you want to turn the table and take down the other side, Chinese socialism, want to spread the color revolution, I'm sorry, it has to be handled according to law. Yeah, so that's how I view it.
Yeah, I think we have the examples of what happens during color revolutions also. I think, if I'm not mistaken, one of your phrases is the Arab winter, right? In terms of, well, what do they have now? Or even worse, the intervention in Libya, which used to be one of the richest countries in Africa, and now it's been reduced to nothing. Slavery was literally reintroduced after Libya was saved by the West.
I also think that, with our Western propaganda, they're still trying to educate their audience that China is this real poor, underdeveloped country. I would like to hear your opinions. Is this a rich and powerful country, or is it a poor country?
I always say, we have to reform the system of measurement. For instance, one major mistake the West made about Russia in this Ukraine crisis was they underestimated Russia's economic power. They measure everything on nominal GDP. So by nominal GDP, in per capita terms, China is a technically developing country. But I said if you use another criteria, I said if I compare Shanghai and New York, if you look at the nominal GDP, New York per capita GDP is 4 times higher than Shanghai. But if I use another criteria, all your Western data and Chinese data, official data, I use number 1, household assets, middle level. Second, life expectancy. Number 3, child mortality rate. 4, infrastructure. The list goes on. Shanghai has done and is doing much, much better than New York. Yeah.
That's an interesting
So I would
comparison.
suggest that we should not use this term. I personally do not use the term developed world. Developing world are still using. Also, Donald Trump is using developing country for United States. But the developed country is a term I do not use.
But
For
Professor,
the Western country.
but Professor, for our audience here that can see through the Western propaganda, that can reach further, what kind of books would you recommend? Can you recommend maybe some of your books that people can educate themselves to read?
Yeah. Well, I really recommend my book, The China Wave, in English. It's a translation of 中国震撼, The China Wave, Rise of Civilizational State, which was published 11 years ago. And it sold over 2 million copies within China, Chinese edition. It's also very well reviewed in Amazon bookstore. I try to give a comprehensive and overall picture of China, its history, a Chinese political system, economic system, and social system in comparison with those in the West. So after 11, 12 years, it proves to be accurate. By the way, civilizational state, I coined and created this very concept. It's now in fashion.
Oh, fantastic.
Since we're in a media environment, I'm actually wondering. I like how you tell China's story, and I've seen you on these different panels and things like that. But generally speaking, China doesn't do a very good job of telling its side of the story. It comes nowhere near being able to compete with Western propaganda, that's for sure. I mean, do you have any advice for, what should media outlets in China be doing differently to get their story across better?
Indeed, this is a huge challenge, how to tell China's story in a way understandable by even Chinese within China and by outside, by foreigners. It's a challenge. For us, it's not that difficult. Yet for all kinds of reasons, somehow there are also linguistic difficulties, there are also cultural differences. In the first place, as a scholar, academic, I think we should have quality scholarship, which is really the foundation of many analyses. And after that, I hope we can be more spontaneous. And I always say, our many media institutions should learn from the young people. They know how to tell Chinese stories on the internet. They are doing a good job, And so less official, more spontaneous, more from people to people and from the young to the young. And I said to make this whole, course of Chinese narrative, whatever, a dynamic course, which people really find good, interesting. Yeah, we can do that. We have real good stories here. The way is how to deliver, present them in a way attractive to others.
Yeah, hopefully we'll see some better stuff coming out then.
We all hope.
So Daniel, do you have any more questions for the professor?
No, I guess, we're on the same wavelength for a lot of things. So, you have plenty of different forums you take part in where you're being attacked all the time and you hardly get a chance to speak. So I didn't necessarily want to I just wanted to give you more of a chance to say your part. But with that said though, do you, we talk a lot about China's advantages and the system and how it works. What are the disadvantages? Do you think that there's anything that really is a disadvantage right now or that needs to be improved? That would really be my last question.
And I think, as the Chinese model is I said on the whole it's a very good model, but it's not perfect. We have to improve it. One major feature of this model is the role of the government. So there is pros and cons. In the first place, the role of government is historical. It's a vast country. It started with the courtier system and meritocracy. People sit for exam and then you get a position in the government. So on the whole, officials are more competent. But the problem is that with this kind of system, there is also a drawback that it can be overly bureaucratic. There is what we call a problem, a crisis. You learn something from the West. The mayor will go there and say, this is an individual case, we're going to make an investigation, and then he left the room and go to the spot. So these are easy to learn, but sometimes somehow the system become bureaucratic. That's a key problem here. We have to cope with that and overcome. That's why I have to reform and reform and reform.
I think it's risk adverse also too, because if you look at local government officials and things like that, they get replaced for what would be considered small issues in the West. So there's this level of hyper accountability, and I wonder if it creates a system where people just aren't willing to take risks because of that.
I agree with you. This idea of risk aversion is obviously there, and especially when China began to focus more on fighting corruption and on procedural rule of law and its procedures. As a result, it becomes more difficult. So most people say, why we should risk our political life? Let's try to be politically safe, so become more conservative. But in the end, the system is fascinating. We face all kinds of difficulties here and there, but in the end, you can get things done.
I think my last question for you, Professor, is there's 10.8 million Chinese students graduated now this year. And you spoke about, you said that the good stories or the stories are being told by the youth. With this 10.8 million that have graduated now, is the job market ready for them? And I think that's an interesting question, because the Western media is really focusing on that number. And maybe you could give us some insight.
No, in fact, now there's a huge demand for many jobs, especially in factories, in grassroots companies, in the several lines of industry like electronics. They cannot hire enough people. So you have to have through some kind of education campaign so that people will focus on these areas, not necessarily your lifelong career, but as a starting point. See, let's have 3 years work in the factory, in the electronics industry. We don't have enough population workers there, young workers there. So there is, on the one hand, insufficient labor supply. On the other hand, there are oversupply. So we have to try to make a balance between the two. But on the whole, after all, China is one of very few economies, big economy that is still growing. That's why we are slightly more optimistic than many other people in other countries.
Well, Professor, I want to thank you for your contributions, also helping educate our Western audience, because with your books, your literature, your words mean a lot during this time in the world. And I also want to commend Daniel Dumbrill, who's done an exceptional job over the last couple of years, creating content to try to bridge that gap between the Western and the Chinese audiences, to understand each other so that we can move forward. Gentlemen, I want to thank you once again for joining us on the show. We're going to wrap it up now. And if you want to check out one of the professor's books, we'll put a link in the description below. Please leave your comment below. Thank you for watching. Take care.
Thank you, Alex.